Hey guys, welcome back to CLOWNFISH TV. This is Kneon. We're gonna talk about Dungeons and Dragons, tabletop gaming, and the utter state of things. And this is why a few months ago I was telling you that you might want to dip out of Wizards of the Coast product and move on to something that's not quite as political. I'm not going to name specific systems because one of the systems I promoted apparently the developer didn't appreciate that they got a shout out on CLOWNFISH TV, so I'm not going to mention it again. It is a good system though. You can go back and check previous videos, but we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and racism because it's coming up again. Now Wizards of the Coast is apparently going to get rid of the term race, and they're going to get rid of races in Dungeons and Dragons, which doesn't make any sense to me because in regards to humans have always been identified as one race, regardless of their ethnicity. When we're talking races, we're talking about different species of creatures. And at the end of the day, this is just a fictitious game. This is fiction. It's all fiction. But everybody's taking it so deathly serious, and we're gonna talk about that and kind of how things got to this point, in my opinion. Before we get into it, please give us a sub if you haven't done so already. We do talk about tabletop gaming occasionally. It's not one of our major talking points here. We talk mostly about pop culture, movies, comic books, a lot of anime, animation, video game news, that sort of thing. That's what you can expect from us. And we also have CLOWNFISH TV Gaming. Go out and check CLOWNFISH TV Gaming. And just a quick reminder, we have a week left on the pre-sale for the CLOWNFISH TV enamel pin. You can check that out on shopclownfish.com. I will put a link in the description. So here we go. VG247 put this up yesterday, and I had a bunch of people send it to me on Twitter asking if I had seen it, because we had talked before about how I personally was not going to continue to support Wizards of the Coast because I think they're getting way too political with their gaming, that they've brought politics to the gaming table. And I always thought personally that the gaming table should be subject to the campaigners' desires. If you want to bring politics into your game, that's fine. I don't think Wizards of the Coast should be forcing politics onto people, and I certainly don't think that they should be rewriting decades-old lore, decades-old rules just to appease a handful of relatively new gamers. You know, we are talking about orcs. Orcs were problematic. For some reason, there was this conversation. I think it started as a joke. The orcs were problematic because they were all bad guys, and we didn't want orcs to be problematic. It was racist. It was racist because orcs were like minorities. And I'm sorry, if you view an orc as a minority, I think you are actually a racist. Nobody ever thought that orcs were racist. They are monsters. And look, DnD, which popularized orcs, of course, based on Tolkien's orcs, but really orcs came to the forefront, I think, with Dungeons and Dragons, at least in the mainstream. But other companies don't shy away from orcs. We've got games like Orcs Must Die 3, because orcs must die because they're bad guys. They're bad guys. I don't care what their personal problems are. I don't care what these fictitious monsters have to say about world events. I don't care if they had a shitty home life. I don't care. Orcs Must Die. Orcs Must Die 3. And it got a really good review, actually, for being a Stadia title on IGN. Go figure. So IGN must agree that orcs must die. So this was out yesterday, making the rounds. Sophia Norwitz put out fans talking about all the new fans that are upset about race in Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm telling you, the people who are calling for massive changes and the politicizing Dungeons and Dragons, these are not longtime fans. These are new people who got into RPGs, I think, recently, who are now calling for a bunch of changes. Because if you're an old school fan, you're not going to be offended by orcs. You're not going to be offended by the fact that all of these different races of people, they're not all human. The majority are human, but we have a lot of non-human races. And I think in that case, it's not racist to call, dragon people a different race because they're clearly not human, and they're not an allegory for minorities. This is just stupid. This is really stupid. And Wizards of the Coast, you're going to listen to your sensitivity readers over your fans, over your longtime fans. You're going to make the game weirdly political, and people are they're going to dip out. They're just going to dip out. So she went on to say, no, what you actually mean are perpetually angry outrage mongers who join hobbies just to change them from within. This has been my experience too. We're seeing it in comics. We're seeing it in tabletop. Definitely, I think tabletop was probably the first hobby to fall to perpetually angry outrage mongers. I think these types have no respect or enjoyment for the games they partake in, and instead use brute force tactics to alter them. So they do hold an appeal for them. They hold an appeal for them. Again, these are not people who have been playing these games long term. They're new to the hobby, and I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna trace it back to outlets like Nerdist and Geek and Sundry. I think when Hollywood got involved in tabletop gaming, when they made it cool. I'm using air quotes here because it's subjective whether or not it actually is cool. But when we had Geek and Sundry, start pushing tabletop gaming, Nerdist start pushing tabletop gaming, and we started attracting a lot of non-geeks to geek hobbies. In my opinion, that's when things came off the rail. Now, Legendary owns Nerdist and Geek and Sundry, and they had to lay off 30% of the staff because their hits are down big time. I mean, you can see for Geek and Sundry, if you go out and check out their Social Blade, they get a couple 100,000 views a day, which is okay. There are individual YouTubers who get more than that, and this is supposed to be some big Hollywood thing with, fancy sets and the whole thing, but they're laying off their staffers. But you can see this kind of downward trend here, and I think it's going to continue to go down because they're laying people off. I think the Hollywood geek thing is over, but the damage has been done. We've already got people coming into the hobby for the first time, which is good. But again, it's no longer Dungeons and Dragons if you bring people in and then they want to change everything. So let's go to the original article. This is coming from VG247. Dungeons and Dragons could be doing away with the term race in character creation, and fans are suggesting plenty of better alternatives. That is highly subjective. Back in June, Dungeons & Dragons principal rules designer Jeremy Crawford responded to a query about a yet-to-be-announced D&D product. However, the tweets recently resurfaced on Resetera. This is part of the problem too. Never, ever listen to Resetera. You want to know where perpetually offended people live? They live on Resetera. You want to know where a lot of the hit pieces coming out against gamers, tabletop and video gamers, come from, or originate from, comes from Resetera. Do not listen to Resetera, but they did, so here we are. Players are having a lengthy conversation about ways to redesign the game in a fairer and more thoughtful way. You can check out the original tweet below, which is the first piece of evidence suggesting that Dungeons & Dragons might be removing the word race from character generation. Well, it's still on the website, D&D Online. We got races. Jeremy Crawford, the not yet announced product below still hasn't been announced. I'm excited for it. Later this year, we will release a product not yet announced that offers a way for a player to customize their character's origin, including the option to change the ability score increases that come from being an elf, a dwarf, or one of D&D's many other playable folk. This option emphasizes that each person in the game is an individual with capabilities all their own. So I'm assuming they're going to take away the modifiers, the bonuses that individual races have. And again, we're dealing with non-human characters. We're dealing with fictitious non-human characters. I don't think there's anything racist about, elves having certain abilities over dwarves, etc., etc. This is stupid. The project Crawford claims he's excited about is quoted for in the tweet. So a Dungeons & Dragons fan responded to Crawford's reply with a tweet of their own saying, I noticed the word race isn't used. Is Wizards of the Coast looking to exchange that word with another, perhaps more accurate word? I feel species captures what is better, but it feels too science-y. Fun fact, Crawford replied, the word species has been used since at least the 14th century, which is in a time period D&D often emulates. People have taken to the Resetera thread. Don't go to Resetera. It's not real people. People have taken to the Resetera thread linked above to offer their own substitutes, with many players expressing that species does in fact sound too sciencey. Ancestry is the best word to substitute. Good on them in any case. Others suggest lineage, kin, folk, and more. I am sorry. When you're dealing with these non-human sentient beings, race is perfectly acceptable. It is perfectly acceptable. We don't have to change it. The only way to be racist is if you had human characters and you had to choose a certain ethnicity of a human character, you know, instead of just being kind of a blanket term human. But humans are not halflings, and halflings are not elves, and elves are not dwarves. They're not all related. Really, they are in fact different races, different species, whatever you want to call them. Species sounds too sciencey. We can't do science in D&D. In related news, Wizards of the Coast is planning 7 or 8 new games for the future. Well, good for them. I don't know how many of those I will be buying, but probably not 7 or 8. So look, this whole thing has blown up. You know, the Washington Post weighed in July 24th. Amid a pandemic and racial reckoning, D&D finds itself at an inflection point. They talk about how there are a lot of new people coming to the game now because they're in lockdown. And look, I think that's a good thing that more people are playing tabletop games. But what's going on is we have a lot of people who, you know, want to change the game to suit their own current political hot takes, and you're free to do that. You're absolutely, if in your own campaign, if you want to reflect real world politics or whatever in your campaign, I think you're well within your rights to do that. But when you come into a hobby and demand change immediately to make it feel safer for you, then eventually you're going to change everything, and it's not going to be the same game. But you don't really care because you weren't really a fan of it to begin with. Because what you wanted was a changed game. You go into a Mexican restaurant, you don't like the food, you demand a hamburger. And then you demand, and that's fine, maybe they can make you a hamburger, but then you demand that they only serve hamburgers because their food offends you somehow, or it's too spicy. Well, at that point, it's no longer a Mexican restaurant, it's McDonald's, okay? So that's what's kind of going on here. And look, people have been free to make changes to their campaigns for years, but now because of Resetera and a handful of outrage mobsters on Twitter, Wizards of the Coast is caving and changing the game, and it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop. They're going to continue to do this until, you know, there's some financial pushback. I don't know. I'm just like, I don't need any new D&D stuff. You know, if I have to, I'll go back to like 2nd or 3rd edition. I don't need any new D&D stuff. Personal choice. So they're talking about Dungeons and Dragons and all of that, and how they have to keep up with the spiking demand because everybody's in lockdown. So new players, this is the problem. New players joining the D&D community enter at an unprecedented moment in history, in a tumultuous one for tabletop gaming. Protests over the deaths of black people at the hands of police have forced the industry to re-examine its products and practices. No, again, an outrage mob on Twitter and an outrage mob on Resetera has demanded that Wizards of the Coast change decades-old rules to suit them. Last month, Wizards of the Coast, the game publisher known for D&D, announced it was banning cards, including Invoke Prejudice from Magic the Gathering, the popular card game it also administers. Around the same time, the company put out a statement about how it plans to change the way it treats different races. The categorization used to differentiate elves, dwarves, orcs, humans, and more in the D&D universe. They are races. I'm sorry, they're not human. Throughout the 50-year history of D&D, some of the peoples in the game, orcs and drow, a type of elf being two of the prime examples, have been characterized as monstrous and evil, using descriptions that are painfully reminiscent of how real-world ethnic groups have been and continue to be denigrated. Yet, There was also an article that came out that, you know, at Wizards of the Coast, they're not treating their black employees very well. I'm just saying. A lot of times the people who put on the biggest show to say that they are good people or show that they're good people really aren't all that good, are they? They're not. They'll have their work cut out for them. The reason that evil cultures exist in Dungeons and Dragons is because there is a non-insignificant subset of players, the vast majority, who want to play a game where they kick down the door heroically and kill the bad guy without interrogating what that means, without understanding why the bad guys are the bad guys. To do that, you need to have a setting that washes its hands of any sort of moral judgment of someone who wants to pursue that style of fantasy violence, said Austin Walker, game master for the role-playing podcast Friends at the Table. When you have an entire culture that's evil, it's very easy to allow that style of play to happen and even subtly encourage it. Hey, look, when D&D first started, bunch of friends in a dungeon fighting dragons. That's what it was. You get dungeon, you find the bad guys, the monsters, you kill them, you take their treasure, you go back to town, you get the better weapons, you go find a bigger dungeon, you go kill more monsters. That's how the game got started. What game are you playing? Do we have to blame Geek and Sundry for that? Because this is how the game was played. You are free to, you know, add to it whatever you want to, but to make everybody have to change their style of play to suit your sensibilities, your oversensitive sensibilities is dumb. But Wizards of the Coast is going to go along with it. And they're going to lose money. I think they are. Because a non-insignificant subset, the vast majority of players, the company has pledged to change some of the mechanics of the game, including fixing what it refers to as errors of judgment in reprints of old campaigns and introducing a way for characters to alter the ability modifiers afforded to different races. In current iteration, half-orcs, for example, get a boost to strength and ability to make savage attacks. Well, if you're a half-orc, genetically, you're gonna be stronger. I'm sorry you don't like to hear that. I'm sorry you would like everyone to be perfectly equal, Harrison Bergeron style, but that's not the way it works in the real world. There are some people who are physically stronger, and a lot of it comes down to genetics. I'm sorry if that's too sciencey for you, but that's the way it worked. Many in the tabletop community have applauded these proposed changes. Resetera and Twitter, which is not the real world. To others, however, the problematic elements of D&D are too embedded in its long legacy, and that the company that produces the game is too embedded. They talk about Orion D. Black. They talk about some of their freelancers who did not appreciate how they were treated at the company, etc., etc. But yeah, I mean, this was a discussion before they decided to do it. And like, they started working on Wizards of the Coast. Well, they started working from within, I think, because you had people in the community that were like, hey, this needs to change because I know I just started playing last week, but I'm offended. You know, that's usually how it is. I just started playing last week and oh my God, I'm so offended. And you've got the Portland comics crowd, I think, that latched on to D&D too. And you've got the people who've been watching the Hollywood players and all of that. And the media started working on it. The orcs is racist thing, which I thought started as a joke. But you can't joke with these people. Everything is serious. Everything is a problem. You know, now we've even got this mom site, moms.com. Dungeons and Dragons is abolishing racist stereotypes in game characters. Moms.com is probably jumping at this because these are probably the same Karens that were tying Dungeons and Dragons to Satanism and heavy metal and all that jazz. So they're like, oh my God, and it's racist. It summons demons and it's racist. Oh my God, my kids cannot play this game. So yeah, I mean, this is dumb. Again, personal opinion, this is dumb. This is an overcorrection that literally nobody was asking for. And if people are offended by parts of the game, then maybe they should find another game to play instead of trying to change games that have been this way for 50 years. Just go make your own game. Find another game that's non-violent, non-offensive. D&D has always been about, or used to always be about, in my opinion, killing orcs, because orcs must die. They must die. Orcs must die. Look at this. This looks like a hell of a lot of fun, actually. I feel like killing some orcs. Maybe I'll go play this game to kill some orcs, because I'm not going to get my orc murdering fix on D&D anymore. It's just not going to happen, because it's offensive. It's offensive! Alright guys, we'll talk later. Hey guys, thanks for watching CLOWNFISH TV. Please consider supporting the channel. Go to clownfishsupport.com. That's clownfishsupport.com. And if you want to join our community, go to clownfishtalk.com. That's clownfishtalk.com. Please subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. We will talk to you next time.